So we're not going to talk too much about the Cold War abroad other than today. So we definitely want to be paying attention and getting as much information down as we want. So, okay, so JFK, Kennedy, right? He launches an attack on Cuba using Cuban exiles trained by the CIA. So what is exile? What does that mean if someone's exiled?
Banned?
Yeah, they're banned, they're kicked out of the country. So if there's a communist revolution, who do we think is getting kicked out of Cuba?
The capitalists.
Yeah, capitalists. So anybody who's against communism. So the US is recruiting them and the CIA, so the Central Intelligence Agency, is that what it is? Agency? Thank you, I wasn't sure. I'm pretty sure it is agency now that you say it. So the Central Intelligence Agency, who does all the spying and things like that for the United States, takes these exiles from Cuba and trains them to invade. Okay, so his goal in doing that was to overthrow Castro. And so why do you think he might want to be using exiles for this attack versus army?
No,
Because they had nuclear weapons.
Well, see, they didn't know that yet at this point, but you're getting ahead, so we're going to be talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is good.
Maybe because they look like
Okay.
so they're not going to know.
Good.
We don't want to start a war.
Yeah, they are
our
Cuban.
country and another country where we can just make these feel like, oh, it's their own people.
Okay, great. So I'm going to repeat what both of these groups said because you guys bring up two really important points. So the reason why they want to be using Cubans is because they are Cuban. They look like Cubans. They can go undetected. They have knowledge of the land. They're from there, you know? You don't need a map. You know your way around. And then as Dorian brought up also, is that then it's not going to look so much unless it came out that the CIA trained them that it's the U.S. attack. But of course, since everything fell apart, they found out pretty quickly that it was the U.S. But his idea was, oh, if I can just use these exiles to go in and do my dirty work, then it'll be fine. So they got caught. So the attack was a disaster and a huge embarrassment for Kennedy. And so the only result of it was that Castro, Fidel Castro, of course, deeply feared a U.S. invasion. So he's like, they invaded once, they're going to do it again. To protect themselves, Cuba now began installing nuclear weapons. So that's what Abel was bringing up. So I'll explain that in a second. So to protect themselves, Cuba begins installing nuclear weapons. So they didn't have them before this point, or at least not in large quantities. But because Castro fears another U.S. invasion, they start to install many nuclear weapons. And so now the U.S. is terrified that the Cubans, who of course are backed by the Soviet Union, would attack them. And so Melissa was asking who's in this picture. It's John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev, who's the head of the Soviet Union right now. So what are they doing? They're arm wrestling, right? And what are they sitting on top of?
Missiles.
Yeah, nuclear weapons. So they're sitting on top of these nuclear weapons and basically engaging in this arm wrestling match. And so, if you want to know who would back down, I think we already know that there wouldn't be a nuclear attack.
Look, they're going to push that button.
Okay, good. And so what's the button?
Send off their missiles.
Right,
yeah.
the detonator, right?
Yep.
So that's going to be, so he has his finger, because they're in this arm wrestling match, right? And that's the Cold War. And then, yeah, both have their fingers right over the detonator. So, if you want to know who's going to back down, how this all gets resolved,
And it looks like FDR's going to win because he's a little bit more down.
well, we'll have to just see. So hopefully you will pick that one, the Bay of Pigs and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So finally, the Vietnam War. So similar to what happened with Korea, we have these two different zones of occupation in a way. So what it is that the French were the ones who controlled Vietnam prior to the war. So when we talked about one of the consequences of the war was decolonization, they got rid of their colonies. France kind of got their butts kicked in the war. They couldn't really afford to have a colony anymore. So for that reason, Vietnam was free. Okay? And so the problem is, so when they left, there was a power vacuum. Can anyone explain to me what a power vacuum means?
Like everybody wanted power.
So what's a vacuum? So it's not, I'm not talking about like,
Something that
I'm not,
sucks. Power is being sucked away.
so this is actually different. So that's why I wanted to bring that up. So a vacuum not only means like the Hoover that goes around and cleans your carpet. But a vacuum also it means that there's nothing there. So if there's a vacuum, like space is considered
like
a vacuum. Yeah, so it's kind of like vacant in a way. Yeah, so it means that there was nobody in power at this time. And so within a month of each other, we have 2 different governments being declared in this country. Alright, so just stay with me. Like I said, we just have one more slide after this. And so this is important. So Vietnam is definitely a really interesting war. So we have up here in the north, we have one side, and in the south, we have the U.S. So you guys need to know that in the north, so similar to how it was in Korea, in the north we have the Soviet Union, and in the south we have the U.S. and the other anti-communists. So we have 2 different governments, and both of them are saying, no, I'm the legitimate ruler. No, I'm the legitimate ruler. And so we have, it then again breaks up into North and South Vietnam for this reason. And so once again, we have the communists versus the anti-communists. So that's why I think the Cold War is an interesting term, because even though the US and the Soviet Union didn't battle each other directly, it definitely didn't lack military engagement. So that's why I wanted to do this lesson today about, it's called the Cold War, but that's not to mean that they literally just sat there arm wrestling each other. So there was a lot of blows that were being thrown, but they did it indirectly. So they did it through, through other countries, through their involvement in Cuba, other Latin American countries as well, through their involvement in Berlin, Vietnam, Korea, all these different places are seats of hot conflict during this quote-unquote Cold War. So we're going to go on to the last one. Okay, we need a moment longer. All you really need to know, actually, is that in the north, we have the Soviet Union, and in the south, we have the United States. So you don't need to know the names of the different groups yet, unless you pick that. So I just want to get through this so you guys can get a chance to work on your actual project. Okay? So what's interesting about this war also, so it lasted through the administrations of 6 presidents. So 6 U.S. presidents were in office during this war. It's a long war.
That's about 12 years.
I mean, yes, Kennedy was assassinated prematurely, but...
I'm mixing it a water
Prematurely? Well, every assassination is premature, I guess. Meaning that he was assassinated and he left office prematurely. What I was getting at with that. So he didn't serve his full 4 years. But it lasted the administrations of 6 presidents, so you see a lot of differences in how they're treating it. It's very unpopular and led to many protests. So this is kind of like when you think of all the anti-war demonstrations.
Or John Lennon.
It was in response to this war. All the hippies, yep. We have enormous fatalities. So 3 to 4 million Vietnamese were killed. Up to 2 million Laotians and Cambodians, and around 60,000 U.S. soldiers. So huge numbers of casualties. Again, you don't need to get these numbers down, but this is just to give you an idea if this is something that you'd be interested in learning more about. And then the question is, would the communists be triumphant? How and when would the U.S. exit the war? So also, if you've seen Forrest Gump, the war that he was fighting in was the Vietnam War. So maybe that will intrigue you. It is a great movie. Okay, so this was our last slide. I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a second to get the information. So you want to pick what you're most interested in. All right, I need everybody's attention, please. Side conversations, let's focus on after this. You'll have your free time to work on it. Thank you. So you're going to pick what event you're most interested in of the 4, and so there's going to be, I don't have enough packets for everybody to all do the same event, but there is enough for most people to get what they want. There's going to be bold print terms in the packet. You have to use at least 5 of them, and I'll leave these instructions up as you guys are working on it. And you have to label all your drawings. So how I showed you, you need to have it all labeled, and be sure you include important dates. And then when's it due? Wednesday.